Let's move on now and bring you more on one of our top stories about Australia's deteriorating relationship with China. Joining us live is Jeffrey Wilson. He's a research director at the Perth USAsia Centre. Appreciate your time. The Darwin Point, we've been discussing this today. It really is a good example, isn't it, of where our economic and defence needs intersect. What's your expectation as to the future of that 99-year lease by the Chinese company Landbridge of the Port of Darwin?
Well, that agreement was negotiated in a very different time in Australia-China relations and indeed China's behaviour globally. Given what's changed, the port itself hasn't changed, the agreement itself hasn't changed in that time, but what has is how China behaves. And so what's happening at the moment is, given that new environment, it's going to be referred back for yet another look at the arrangements and seeing whether what's in place there is really enough, given the kind of behaviours we've seen from China overseas in the intervening period since the lease was signed.
Because it seems like China is being pretty effective in terms of using our economic relationship as a way to coerce and punish Australia effectively for policy positions that it's not happy about.
That's true, but this is something that China has actually found part of its foreign policy toolkit in recent years. Australia suffered this quite difficultly last year, where over $50 billion of our exports are now subject to some Chinese sanction. But Australia is actually the 8th country that's been on the receiving end of this kind of Chinese behaviour. So it's now become a common part of what you might have seen referred to in the last couple of days as a grey zone tactic. Not explicitly an act of war or aggression, but something that's used in the kind of middle and deniable space to really apply pressure to governments.
$50 billion worth of exports subject to those sanctions, that's an astounding figure. When you look at how bad this could get, I mean, you're expecting further pain is on the way?
So over the course of 2020, China applied some kind of official or grey zone sanction to 13 different Australian export products. And in 2019, which is the last year before coronavirus, those 13 industries exported $52 billion to China. So that's the kind of blast radius from that damage. Looking forward, there's actually not a lot more that might happen on that front. Most of the major Australian exports to China have been affected in some way by one of the measures already. Dairy has not yet been affected, and a few minor farm products as well. But there isn't a lot more short of iron ore or natural gas that China could actually apply sanction to.
Right, so they essentially can't do without our iron ore, and what, you think we can feel confident that the mining sector is safe from China's wrath?
One of the challenges for the mining sector for China is, as it stimulates its economy to respond to the coronavirus recession, that means more steel and concrete, which means it needs more energy and iron ore from Australia. And in the short term, there's no alternate supply. You can't just throw up a Pilbara overnight because you've decided you don't like Australia anymore. This is what we see. In fact, just in the last week, the global iron ore price reached $190, a global record, even higher than the figures we were used to here in Western Australia in the mining boom back in 2011. How long that will last is obviously an open question. Probably not 10 years, but certainly another year or two. And that means that China really doesn't have any option in terms of iron ore supply. And that means they can't sanction that like they've sanctioned practically all the other major Australian exports.
Still, though, China obviously not responding very positively to the sort of rhetoric we're seeing coming out of Australia at the moment, whether it be the drums of war are beating comments or talk today about this grey war, as you alluded to earlier with China. I mean, it's clear that China really is getting fed up with a lot of the language coming out of Australia.
Well, China has deteriorating diplomatic relationships with practically every Western country in the world. And in Australia, we often focus on what's happening with us. But if you ask the same questions for the United States, Europe, Japan, they all have the same experience. One of the things that makes the Australia-China case stand out is the scale of those sanctions. When they've applied them to countries in the past, it's been one or two products where they've really gone and kind of thrown the kitchen sink at Australia. And one of the reasons for that is because it's about making an example to other countries. If you challenge us on militarising the South China Sea or gross human rights abuses, this is what's going to happen to you. So to some extent, this Chinese anger is actually less about anything that we're going to do, because the Australian government's unlikely to cave into their 14 demands, one of which is abolish the free press, but more to send a point to other countries, say a country in the region like Indonesia, that this is what happens to you if you ask questions.
Jeffrey Wilson, always appreciate you joining us with your views and analysis. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ash. Cheers.